I mentioned that I got really thirsty today because of my trip to Maekasa yesterday. That turned out to be 55 kilometers on the scooter and a round trip. When I set off on the trip, I wanted to go down some smaller country roads. So I spent some time on Google Maps plotting a route. And the funny thing is that in a lot of cities these days, highway systems get built up around the cities. And when you're in a car or riding a scooter, you really have to plot a route carefully because a lot of streets that you follow will hit that highway and there won't be any way to get across. Like you can only cross these major highway systems on certain roads. And it's very similar to how it used to be in the old days when you had to deal with the rivers, of course, and you couldn't just cross a river anywhere. You had to travel along the river until you got to a bridge that would take you across. And these days, it's the same thing, except highways are kind of like rivers now. They're barriers to people trying to go across them. So I plotted a route pretty carefully the night before. I took Google Maps, and then I was dropping pins on Google Maps just so I could remember the route. And then I was looking for landmarks. It's like, okay, on that corner, there's this temple, and then that corner, that big white building on the side. And I was hoping that the next day I could remember all of that, and I wouldn't have to stop every 2 blocks to get out my phone and check Google Maps again to see that I'm on the right path. And I was pretty successful in that, actually. And I think that's largely because I do so much walking around Maekasa, so the streets are pretty familiar to me. It's just that on a scooter, you're moving much faster, and you have to make decisions at a rapid pace about where to turn, and you don't have nearly as much time as when you're walking. But yeah, I plotted my route out of Maekasa pretty well, and my mind was pretty occupied as well with shooting video on the GoPro. I was thinking ahead to how I wanted to do it. And it's a bit of a tricky business because I'm driving the scooter through this beautiful countryside, but it's not like you want to record every kilometer of countryside as it passes by and upload 2 hours of video to YouTube of just this highway, right? So what exactly do you do? And GoPro has this built-in feature they call time warp. And I don't understand it completely, but it's kind of like a time lapse. But the video you end up at the end is supposed to be much smoother than if you had just done a time lapse. And I've seen comparisons between them, and the time warp is a lot smoother than a time lapse. Exactly how they achieve this, I don't know. And I hadn't used time warp for a very long time. The very first video I shot on a GoPro was in fact a time warp. I bought the GoPro at a store in Kuala Lumpur, and then I walked out of the store down all the escalators because I was in a big shopping complex, and then out onto the streets of Kuala Lumpur, then down into the subway system, and then back up to all the way to my hostel at the time. And I shot that whole thing as a time warp, and I was pretty amazed at how it looked. It looked amazing. But of course, it's a little bit like one of those novelty features when you buy a new toy and it can do this fancy thing, and you're all about that fancy feature when you first buy it, and you use it all the time in the first week, and then you just sort of fall into normal camera usage. And I really never shot another time warp again that I can remember. It was enough for me just to think about shooting regular video. I wasn't thinking in cinematic terms, like how can I make this shot more epic, and how can I do a time warp and spin around and then go into slow motion. And no, I mean, I'm pushed to my limits just turning it on and hoping that the file gets saved. So all of the time warp and slow motion and fancy angles, I've never really gotten to that point. But I thought, since I'm driving a scooter out of Maekasa and going to a hot springs, I can play around with different settings. So I mounted the GoPro on the handlebars of the scooter, and I set up a time warp to get me out of the city. And I think that worked out pretty well. But when I looked at the video later on, it seemed to be too fast because you have different settings in time warp. And I chose 15 times speed. Just seemed reasonable. What do I know? But when I look at 15 times, it's actually so fast that it might be a bit disturbing. Things come and go at a really fast pace. So 10 times might be better, 5 times, something like that. So I'm still playing around with the time warp settings, though I don't know if I really need it for driving a scooter, because on a previous day, all I did was record normal video footage, and then in the video editing app, I sped it up. You can speed it up 2 times, 4 times, or 8 times inside a Power Director, and I thought the video looked pretty good doing that. And doing it that way, it leaves all your options open, because I can be filming in normal mode and I can be speaking and recording audio the whole time. And then later on, I can decide, oh, we don't need the audio. I'm just babbling about nonsense. So I can take that video, which was shot in normal speed, and I can speed it up 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, add music. I can slow it down, put it in slow motion. I can do whatever I want with it. But if you shoot in time warp from the very beginning, that's all you've got. You've got that time warp set at that speed with no audio, and that's it. Plus, in time warp, you only have one field of view. You can only shoot it in wide. But if you shoot in regular video mode, you can shoot in linear, wide, or super view. So again, you get a lot more options just shooting normally, and then you can speed up the video or slow it down. So I'm not entirely convinced that time warp is very useful for a scooter trip. I think it's very useful if you're walking. You get a much smoother image if you're walking compared to time lapse. But on a scooter, it's pretty smooth anyway if you're on highway. So normal video and speeding it up, might be the way to go. That's what I concluded anyway. I also had trouble with the mounting system, because I started the trip with what I figured out from the day before, where I just clamped the GoPro to the left hand grip using this long gooseneck. And that worked really well, because you can take the gooseneck and bend it out of the way of the mirror, and then you can twist it in any direction you like to get the camera nice and level. Plus, the camera is sitting ahead of me. And as I learned yesterday, you really don't want to be fiddling with the camera as you're driving. I would make sure, if I ever wanted to adjust the camera, I would pull over to the side of the road and do it. It's way too dangerous to be doing it while you're driving. But as you're driving, it's not such a big deal. Just a glance at the camera screen, just a quick glance. Oh, it's still recording. I can see the red light flashing, and I can see it's still level. I can just sort of see that everything is okay. So having it in front of me that way on the gooseneck was kind of handy. I like that. But as soon as I went from the paved road to a rough road, and the camera started moving around a lot more because of all the bumps I was hitting, then the gooseneck didn't work at all, because one bump and then the whole camera would just sort of flop over. The gooseneck is designed to be flexible, and when you hit a bump, of course, it just bends all by itself because of the weight of the GoPro, and the whole thing would just bend over, and then I pull it back to the right position, but at the next bump, it bends over again. So I had to stop and remove the gooseneck, and then I tried to do a different mounting system using the Jaws Flex clamp on the grip like I did before, but without the gooseneck. So then I had to carefully aim the camera between the hand grip and the mirror. And that kind of worked out all right, except that when you do it that way, I have no way of leveling the camera. So if the grip, if the handlebars of the scooter are tilted, the whole camera is tilted. And there's no mechanism to straighten it out. And I ran into all kinds of other issues that I won't get into. It's a complicated business, as it turns out, putting this little GoPro on the handlebars of your scooter, especially if you don't have an entire store of accessories available to you at that time. I'm sure there's a million gadgets out there made by a bunch of different companies that would have just stick on, clamp on, and I could set something up perfectly using all these gadgets. But I don't have any of those gadgets right now. All I have is what I have. So I spent a good chunk of yesterday playing around with all the mounting systems and the time warp and then slow motion and speeding up and audio features. Just trying out a whole bunch of different things. I had quite a bit of fun doing that. I didn't really know a lot about where I was going. I knew it was called the Maekasa Hot Springs and Cave. I'd seen that listing a long time ago, and then someone in the comments suggested that I go there. And since I had the scooter, it seemed like a perfect kind of day trip. And it's one of those things where you contrast the journey with the destination, because the destination, the Maekasa Hot Springs and Cave, from what I saw on the internet, was not exactly a spectacular attraction. You wouldn't go far out of your way to go there. If you happen to be in the neighborhood, sure, you would go check it out, but it wasn't a must-see kind of place. But if you combine the journey to get there, then it becomes a much more attractive day trip. And in fact, in my mind, the day was much more about the journey to get there than about the destination itself. And in that, I was actually pleasantly surprised. And it wasn't just the Maekasa hot spring itself, but it was sort of the whole collection of sites and activities surrounding the Maekasa hot springs that made it a very worthwhile trip. I guess what I knew in advance was the big event, the big activity there is to boil your own eggs in the hot water that's coming up out of the ground. So we're talking about geothermal, hot spring water coming out of the ground. And I guess you're supposed to bring eggs, and then you boil your eggs in the hot water, and then you can eat them on the spot. And that's the big thing that you do there. So I thought about bringing eggs, but then I just figured they must supply them. I'm sure someone there sells eggs, so I didn't bother bringing them with me. I knew if I brought them with me in my, in my handy knapsack, chances are they would break by the time I got there. So that's all I knew about the place. But the attractions started to show up long before I got there in the form of the scenery. The closer I got to Maekasa, the more beautiful the scenery became. Much more green, much more lush, a little bit more hilly, and the road became a more windy. And all that time, there was the backdrop of the mountains behind Maekasa, which were growing larger and larger. Because Maekasa, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it properly, but apologies to anyone living in this town. But when I read it in English, it looks like Maekasa. So I'm going to call it Maekasa. But Maekasa is right at the base of the mountains, separating this part of Thailand from the interior. It's like right there at the base of the mountains, and that gives a beautiful backdrop to the town. And that alone is worth going there to see. And the town itself was very beautiful, I thought. Just driving through the streets, it was a lovely place. So lush and green, and they have a beautiful temple there, which I planned on visiting, though I qualified my plans by saying that was only if I had enough energy to go see it. And as it turned out, the way the day went, I could have popped into the temple, but I just did not have the energy to really appreciate it, so I did not go to the temple, as it turns out. But the scenery was very, very nice on the way there, and the scenery in the town itself. And then when I got to the hot springs, it was quirky. I guess maybe that's the best word to describe it. It was just a funky little place that I really enjoyed. And the central attraction is this one quite small hot spring. There's like one point where water is bubbling up out of the ground, and it built up, I assume it's a natural formation of like sulfur and minerals that it's left behind over centuries or millennia, however long the spring has been active. And it built up this mound of yellow, beautiful yellow mineral mound, and the water's coming out of the top, and then it's carved channels in this mineral mound and then channels around the outside. And it's possible that the people that run this place kind of cut channels to make it more accessible. And then you can take your basket of eggs with a little bamboo stick and carefully place it there, your stick across this mound on the ledges, and then you lower your eggs into the hot water and you leave them there to boil. And right at the entrance to the hot springs, there's a little hut, like a shop, where you can buy some food, but you can also buy baskets of quail eggs and chicken eggs. I bought a basket of 5 chicken eggs for 30 baht, and it comes in a beautiful little handmade bamboo, kind of a wicker basket that they make for you, and they tie off the top with a little loop that you put your stick through. It's all very convenient and laid out for you. Though, at this point, anyone going there, if you're happy with quail eggs, that might be the way to go. Because I put my eggs into this hot spring for 20 minutes. That's what everyone recommended you do. They told me 20 minutes to boil them so you can eat them. So I put them in for about 22 minutes as when I finally took them out. But when I opened the first egg, all of the egg white was still almost liquid. It was a little bit solid, just a tiny bit, but really it was just kind of gushy and liquidy. And I ended up having to drink it, like slurping up the egg white. And the egg yolk was cooked, but not the egg white. And I thought, okay, I hadn't left the eggs in long enough. So I ate 2 of the eggs like that. I just kind of slurped up the egg whites, feeling a bit like Rocky. You know, the scene in Rocky where he fills a glass with 5 eggs or 10 eggs, however many it was, and then just drank raw eggs all at once. And that's kind of was my Rocky moment, drinking all this egg white. But I took 3 of the eggs and put them back in the hot spring, thinking they weren't done yet, and I left them in there for almost half an hour, more. So by the time I went back, those eggs had been cooking in the hot spring water for about 50 minutes. So I thought, okay, now they have to be done. I took them back to my little table, cracked one open, and it was exactly the same. The egg white had not solidified at all. So even my last 3 eggs, I still had to slurp them up because they hadn't cooked. The yolks had cooked, but even after nearly an hour of cooking in that hot spring, the egg white still wasn't solid. And that kind of surprised me. And I started wondering if maybe the quail eggs, the much smaller eggs, they might have been the better choice if you like hard-boiled eggs, because maybe they would have cooked through a lot faster. Anyway, my advice is maybe try them both. Get some quail eggs, get some chicken eggs, because no matter how long you leave your chicken eggs in there, they're not going to cook all the way through. So you have to like your eggs very runny and almost drink them. They give you a little bag of soy sauce to dip the eggs in. So I kind of pictured shelling the egg and then taking the hard-boiled egg and dipping it in the soy sauce. But there's no way you could have done that because the egg was still just gushy. There's no way you were turning it upside down and dipping it. All the egg white would just run out. So it was the whole egg experience was a bit different than I expected. But it tasted good. I commented in the video that as I slurped up the liquidy egg whites, it had almost a milky taste, which kind of surprised me. It actually had a very pleasant flavor, more flavorful than cooked egg whites have. So, I don't know. In a liquid state, it had flavor, and yet when I bite through like normal egg white that is cooked, I don't generally taste anything. So yeah, that was interesting. So that was my egg boiling experience at Maekasa, and yeah, that was quite fun. I enjoyed that a lot. Of course, there are a bunch of other things you can do there. You can get massages. There's little restaurants there. You can get something to eat. And there's kind of a wading pool, like a small kiddie pool with mineral spring water. I assume it's hot. I didn't go into it, where I guess an adult could go in there, but I only saw children in there. And there was a much larger pool, quite a deep one, like a swimming pool with different levels and different depths, but that was completely empty. There was no spring water in it, and it was clearly out of order, so you couldn't go into a larger pool. And I saw a sign for some kind of a mineral bath, so perhaps there's another area I could have gone to where you go inside a room, private room, and do a mineral hot spring water sauna or something. I never did manage to track that down. And to be honest, I wouldn't have done it anyway, even if I had found them. But the one thing you can do is dip your feet into this long channel. They take the hot spring water coming from the main spring, and then they funnel it through this long channel with cement on either side. You can sit down on the edges, and then you can put your feet in the water and soak your water in the hot spring mineral water. And I assume that would be good for your skin. I'm sure there's all kinds of health benefits that people will talk about. Unfortunately, as I quickly found out, there was no way I was keeping my feet in that water for more than a couple of seconds. It was way too hot for me. And I don't think it was just me, because when I got there, I did see some other people sitting along the side of this cement ditch or this cement trough, and nobody had their feet in the water. I saw one or people kind of dangling their foot right above the surface, and they sort of touched the water, but nobody was sitting there with their feet fully submerged and just relaxing. I think even people who are much tougher than me would not be able to keep their feet in that water. It was way too hot. And even though the water at the main spring wasn't hot enough to cook the egg whites, it was hot enough that there's no way you're putting your hand in there. I tested it, and it burned my fingers really quickly. So I did sit at the side of the trough, and I submerged both of my feet in the water, and I kept them in there for a few seconds, but I very quickly had to pull them out, and I was doing a lot of ouch, 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 ouch. I was doing a lot of ouching because it really hurt. I don't even think I can go in gradually. Oh, that is really hot. That is painfully hot. Ow, 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 ow. Ooh, that is too hot. And then the whole rest of the day that I was there, I could feel the soles of my feet were quite tender as I was walking around, because they got burned a little bit. So that water is no joke. It's hot. So that was the whole hot spring side of things, boiling the eggs, which I quite enjoyed, and then walking around and soaking my feet. That was all very fun, very quirky, something I'd never done before. But then I went for a little walk, and I found a nice pond with a suspension bridge leading to a couple of shrines. And that was that was a lot of fun, just to walk across the bridge. Very Indiana Jones. It was a cable bridge with wooden planks that you walk on, and about every 15th plank was just completely missing. So you really had to watch where you put your foot, or you're just going to go right down through. And of course, when you saw missing planks, you had to wonder, well, if that plank broke when someone stepped on it, how about the other planks, the ones that aren't broken, the ones that I'm walking on? You had to wonder if they were close to breaking as well. Because this whole park, the whole hot springs park and this shrine and the pond, it had that side to it that I see in a lot of places, where apparently there was a lot of money for building it. You're going to build the shrine, build the temple, build these bathrooms, build this, build that. The budget was there for that, but there was no money set aside in the budget for long-term maintenance. So it just felt like a lot of things there had been built, and then they'd just been abandoned and left to fall apart. And this bridge kind of fell into that category where they had the money to build it, but there's not a whole lot of money being spent maintaining it. So when a board breaks, they just leave it. And over time, more and more of the boards are breaking, and you have to sort of step across these big gaps in the bridge and carefully work your way along. That's just the way things are. There was a bathroom there near this trail that I followed to get to the caves. More about that in a minute. And I went, and it was a big bathroom. I mean, it was a big building, a lot of bathroom rooms on one side with toilets, and a huge line of urinals on the far side. It was a pretty elaborate structure that would be suitable for a lot of people to use. But I'm telling you right now, if you go there, don't, if you want to be horror struck, don't go to that bathroom, because it has been completely abandoned. I think it was abandoned right after it was built, because the structure still seems to be in pretty good shape, but the interior is just a nightmare of human waste. You do not want to go into this place. And there's no running water anywhere anymore. Like even the urinals, there's no running water. There's nothing going on in there anymore. So stay away from the bathroom. That's all I have to say about that. But I found this bathroom because I was trying to find the caves. On my way there, I saw highway signs that said so many kilometers to the Maekasa hot spring and so many kilometers to the Maekasa or Yusa cave. So I thought while I was there, if the caves were not terribly difficult to get to, I might as well go check out the caves. So after I boiled my eggs and drank them, I went off in search of these caves, and I found a sign which was clearly information about these caves, kind of had a map and a route how to get there, but of course it was all in Thai, and there were no numbers, so I couldn't even interpret any information from this sign. I was looking at the sign and I could see the trail that I assumed was the trail from the sign, and I thought, well, looking at the time, thinking about my legs, do I have enough energy left? Should I go in search of this cave? And I decided, yeah, let's go check out these caves, see whether I can find them or not. So I started down this trail, and I was a little bit dismayed at the beginning because the trail almost immediately started to climb, started to go up. And I started to think, yeah, this might turn into a bit of a walk, a bit more of a hike than I bargained on. And I started climbing and climbing and climbing. The sweat started rolling down my face, starting to breathe pretty heavy, watching the sun get lower in the sky. And I kept thinking, should I keep going or not? And I reached that point of no return where you've gone so far that it feels like you should keep going. Like turning back then felt like you've wasted all the energy you've expended to get that far. And for all you know, the caves are just 10 meters ahead. But of course, for all you know, the caves could be 10 miles ahead. You just don't know. And to be honest, I didn't even know whether I was on the right trail going to the caves, because there were no signs at all indicating that you're on the right trail. So for all I knew, I was following a trail that was going up over the top of the mountains, down the other side, and heading towards Tak, 80 kilometers away. I had no idea. So I had all these thoughts going through my mind, but I started the hike and I thought, let's just keep going. And luckily, before too much time had passed and before I was completely wiped out and had no energy left, I got to the very top of the mountain, and then the trail went over the top, down the other side, and I found the caves. And the Maekasa caves, they're worth visiting. I only saw probably 2% of the caves. I don't know. I don't know how deep the caves went. I don't know how big the whole cave system is, because I didn't dare go very far. But just the beginning, like just the opening of the cave and just going a few feet in and seeing the cavern, it was well worth the effort of the climb and getting to this cave system. I went in, and in the video, I shot some video using my smartphone because my GoPro isn't good in low light. So I got out my smartphone, started shooting video with that. And in the video, I made a very big deal of how I couldn't see anything because it was so dark. And I made a big deal out of all the caving stories that I've read in my life of people going into caves, getting in trouble, and then not being able to get out, having to be rescued. And of course, there are some legendary stories that I've read over the years of people who die in caves because they get stuck. There was a huge story in Thailand from a couple of years ago, right? Where some Boy Scouts, some kind of a group of young boys went into a cave system. And while they were in the cave, I believe, if I have my story right, it rained heavily outside and all the water in the cave rivers rose and they couldn't get out anymore. Their exit was blocked because the water levels went up. And they were eventually rescued. But if I remember right, one diver who was part of the rescue team did die trying to get to them and find them and then help them get out. So yeah, caves are no joke. So I was very careful about that, about not going in too far. And I went into one of the main sections and I found a ladder, like a series of steps made out of metal, like metal steps going down deeper into the cave. And I told myself, okay, I'll go down there a few feet into the cave, and that's as far as I'm going to go, no further, because it really was starting to feel late in the day and things were pretty sketchy. I was there by myself. I didn't have a flashlight. I was in sandals. It's not like I was, roped in with a harness and with a support team or people who no one even knew where I was. So I was not going very far into this cave. But I thought going down this steel ladder and a few feet into the cave would be okay. So I'm going down this metal ladder with steps, and I swear the whole thing was threatening to just collapse underneath me. As I'm going down, it made these loud banging and cracking noises as I was making my way down, and the metal itself was snapping. So let's go down these stairs. Ooh, look at that. Man, I don't really trust these stairs either. The metal has rotted all the way through. Oh man, do you hear that? Oh, the whole stairwell is ready to collapse. So I thought, oh boy, this is not a good sign, but I made it to the bottom. It's only 15 steps, something like that. So we're not talking about anything really dangerous. I'm making it sound more dramatic than it was. But in the dark, by yourself, in the middle of Thailand, it feels dramatic. So I made it down to the bottom. And there, on my phone, I could still see a little bit of where I was. But using just my eyes, it was almost pitch black. And I was literally sort of feeling my way forward with my feet, just sort of like feeling a little bit, okay, there's still land, there's still ground underneath my feet, and I'd feel a little bit more, and I'm holding onto the rocks with my hands, and I just wanted to get a little bit in, and I waited for a while, and my eyes adjusted, and I got to see this really large cavern at the opening of this cave, and then a big black pit. And I tried to use my phone flashlight to light up the interior to see where I was, but I really couldn't see anything. And even letting my eyes adjust, all I ever saw was a black pit. and I have no idea what was there. Maybe it was ground, and had I continued, I just would have been on a flat surface. Maybe it really was a pit that goes down into the depths of the earth, you know, hundreds of feet or something. Or maybe there's like a long winding system of interconnected cave tunnels down there. I have no idea what's down there. And I was not about to find out on this trip. So I kind of stayed there long enough to sort of absorb the atmosphere and get in the mood of this, you know, truly an ancient structure. I can't even guess how many hundreds of thousands of years old those caves are. I'm sure they're very, very old. And then it was time to turn around and start heading back. And I wanted to get back into Maekasa before the sun went down, because I did not want to be driving my scooter on my very first real day trip in the dark. I wanted all my driving to be in nice daylight. The climb up to the cave system, by the way, the trail, was not that difficult. I think if you knew where you were going and you knew it wasn't really that far and you didn't have time pressures, so if you removed all of that stress, it would be a very pleasant and very easy walk. I mean, for anyone who's in half decent shape, you could probably make that climb in 30, 45 minutes, something like that, way less than an hour. So we're not talking about serious mountain climbing here. I don't want to give that impression. And in fact, most of the way up consists of actual steps made of concrete that they had built in. As I said, at one point, there had been quite a large budget for building all of this stuff, and they had a budget for all the cement that they needed and a work crew to actually cut a trail and then put in place all of these cement stairs all the way to the top. But right after it had been completed, the whole place had been abandoned, and a lot of the trails, even the cement steps, were just gone or not workable anymore, and you would lose the trail. The trail would just stop, and then you're wondering, oh, which way do I go? And then you have to climb up a dirt trail, like in a different direction, hoping that it eventually connects with the main trail again. And eventually it does. So you kind of had to guess which way to go at certain points, and I made incorrect decisions from time to time. You know, I went down one trail and it would lead to a dead end, and I'd turn around and come back and go in a different direction, trying to find the main trail to continue up. And the whole time I did this, I was carrying the GoPro, and I had it on time warp again. I had the time warp setting, I think 10 times speed for this climb, or maybe I still had it at 15. I can't remember. But I have that video in the actual video that I made of this whole day. I'm not finished editing that video yet because I have so much video to work through, but I think I'm going to end up cutting it into 2 parts. So this is me from the future speaking before I've even finished the videos, but I think I'm going to end up with part 1 being just the scooter trip to Maekasa. That'll be one video, and there will be a second video of boiling eggs at Maekasa, and then that I might be putting that together with the climb to see the caves, or the caves might even be a 3rd video. I'm not really sure how that'll work out yet. But I shot all this video, and my idea was basically just to pick the best bits of each part of the day, and then still make like a 20 or 25 minute video for the entire day. But once I started reviewing the video in my guest house this morning, I really enjoyed a lot of the video that I shot. And since it is my very first real day trip on the scooter, I thought, well, it's kind of a special occasion, so let's kind of try to include as much of the video as possible, like just keep all of it in. So it's ending up being quite a bit longer than I thought it would be. So I think I'll divide it up into 2 or 3 parts. So after my experience at the cave, it was time to come back down, and I ran the GoPro on time warp again for the whole walk all the way down the mountain back to my scooter. And that's where I officially ended the video, because I kind of knew that the journey back to Maekasa was not going to be very special. I was going to take the main highway, Highway 105, all the way basically from Maekasa all the way back to Maekasa. And I wouldn't be stopping along the way or going exploring. It would just be pretty much on the main highway and driving the whole time. But just for fun, I put the GoPro up on the handlebars of the bike and I shot time warp video of the entire journey all the way back to Maekasa. And once I got back into Maekasa, I went to a little store right near my guest house and I picked up not 1, but 2 big bottles of ice cold Chang beer to reward myself for the day. I talked about how I didn't drink all day and I was actually really thirsty. So when I got that beer back to my guest house room, I thought I was actually going to set up the GoPro and sort of talk about the day and drink the beer at the same time. But I just had no energy left for that at all. So I got back into my guest house room. And the first thing I do every time I get back is unpack all of my electronics. And the first thing I do is put all the batteries into the chargers. I charge up everything. And before I'd even finished putting the batteries in the chargers, I'd already powered down 1 can of beer, and I was only gonna drink 1, but I drank that one so fast that as soon as I finished it, I just cracked open the other one. That one went down too. Oh, that was so good. I mean, is there anything like a cold beer after a full day trip of boiling eggs at hot springs and spelunking and mountain climbing and driving scooter through the countryside? It was a good day. It really was a good day when you pile all the experiences into one. And the cold beer at the end of it, that was the icing on the cake. That was so tasty. Yeah, I really like that. So that was my day at Maekasa. My one regret maybe is that I didn't plan to stay the night there. And that's usually something I like to do. I don't like to make long days out of anything. I like to make them very manageable and pleasant. And one way to do that is to, instead of going somewhere, doing something, and then coming all the way back, what I like to do is go somewhere, do something, and then stay there overnight. Just find a little hotel there, spend the night, relax, wake up in the morning, and then casually and slowly make your way back to where you started. And I found over the years that's really interesting to do, because when you stay in one place, even for one night or one day, you see it in different lights. Like you might see it in the full light of day, you see it at and when all the other tourists are there. But if you stay there overnight, the sun goes down, it becomes more gentle and pleasant. All the tourists that you were with all day long, they've all gone home, and now you have the whole place to yourself, and you see it in a new light. You see it more like the locals see it, because you see them closing all the shops, all the tourists have left for the day, they're cleaning up, they're shutting down, and then they're going to get ready for the next day. And you kind of get a sense of that, the rhythm of a place like that when they open up in the morning for all the new tourists to come, and then they're there all day. Then they shut down at the end of the day. It's nice to be there for that as well. Plus, just being able to relax. And at the end of the day, you're not faced with a 30-kilometer bike ride to go all the way back home again. But I didn't plan ahead to do that. And just for budget reasons, I thought, well, I'm already paying for a room in Maekasa, and it's not that far away, and I have a scooter. So I decided to just drive back to Maekasa. But even when I did that, I kind of thought, you should have spent the money and just stayed just for one night in a hotel in Maekasa. Very pretty place. And in the video, I shot a few seconds of one of the hotels there that looked like a very interesting place to stay. I never did find out how much it cost. I think it was called the Ban Karn Maekasa Homestay. And if you look at their listing on Google Maps, you can see a lot of photographs of the decor. And I think each room has like a hot spring tub where you can soak in the hot spring mineral water. So I assume all of that comes with a premium price. It might be a little bit expensive, but it didn't look like an expensive place. But it would have been really nice to stay there overnight. I think that's the best way to go to Maekasa when I look back on it now. Just drive there, check into your room at a hotel like that, right beside the hot springs, put all your bags away, park your scooter, have a drink, relax, and then you can just walk from your hotel to the hot springs, boil your eggs, do all your things, climb to the cave, come back down, and then in the next morning, you could do it all over again. You know, you could do another trip to the hot springs in the morning, and then check out of your room at noon, whenever checkout time is, and then go back to Maekasa. And then I think you get much more out of the experience. So that's how I should have done it. And I may end up doing that again in the future, depending how long I stay in Maekasa. So I think that is the end of my fireside chat, talking about my trip to Maekasa. I just thought, I know I'm going to post a video about the whole experience. I'm still working on the videos, as I said, but it's kind of fun just to talk about it too and give a little bit of the behind the scenes of the video itself. So in my previous life, I would normally go on a day trip like that, and then the next morning, the first thing I do, I wake up at the crack of dawn, and then I turn on my laptop when I had a laptop, and then I would type out the whole story. I would write the story in an email to a friend. These days, I'm more of a video guy, of course. So instead of writing the story, I make a video of the event, and now I have my fireside chat talking about it later on. So yeah, I'm still here at the This Is a Book coffee shop, and my cafe latte is finished, and I'm going to hop back on my scooter, head back into Maekasa. Yeah, I'm very pleased I made this trip out here today. See you, boys. Hello. Do you want to come over and say hi? Come here. Come on. Come on. Oh, I guess I have to come to you? I thought I'd let you come to me, just to make sure that you're friendly. Oh, look at those eyes. Big, droopy, friendly eyes. Yeah. Yeah. I better give you a good scratching since I disturbed your nap, But I think I think you nap all day, every day, don't you? Okay, I'm gonna go look for some coffee or a cold drink. Is that okay? Is that okay with you? Yeah? All right, I'll come back out, She's leaning hard into my hand. I feel if I move my hand, she's just gonna fall over. Okay, I'll see you.